Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The apartment was a shoebox on the third floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and whatever the neighbors were cooking. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so narrow you had to turn sideways to get to the fridge. But in 2015, splitting $800 a month was the only way I could afford to live anywhere near downtown. I worked at a call center with about 40 other people, and when Jason from the evening shift mentioned he needed a place, it seemed like the perfect solution. We'd worked different schedules for 6 months, exchanged maybe 20 words total, but he seemed normal enough. Quiet guy, always had his lunch in a brown paper bag, never caused any drama at work. The day he moved in, he brought 3 boxes and a duffel bag. That should have been my first clue that something was different about him. Within the first week, Jason had already established what I can only describe as a system. He'd labeled his shelf in the fridge with a piece of masking tape that had his initials written in tiny, precise letters. He kept a notebook on the kitchen counter where he'd write down every time he took out the trash or bought toilet paper. At first, I thought he was just really organized, maybe had some bad roommate experiences before. I even found it kind of amusing when he asked if we could schedule our shower times to avoid bathroom conflicts. But then came the locks. One evening, I got home to find he'd installed a padlock on his bedroom door. When I asked about it, he just stared at me for a few seconds too long before saying he had sensitive work documents in there. The way he said it, like he was daring me to question him further, made the hair on my arms stand up. Things started disappearing around the 2nd month. First, it was small stuff. My favorite coffee mug vanished from the kitchen, then a phone charger I always kept plugged in by the couch. I figured I'd misplaced them, maybe left the mug at work or lent the charger to someone. But then my electric razor disappeared from the bathroom counter where I'd left it that morning, and I found it 2 days later in the gap between my bed and the wall. Jason helped me look for it, even moved my dresser to check behind it. He was the one who found it, holding it up with this concerned expression, asking if I'd been stressed lately, maybe forgetting where I put things. The way he emphasized the word forgetting made my skin crawl. I started keeping my bedroom door locked after that, even though I didn't have anything worth stealing. The bills were what really set off alarm bells in my head. Our arrangement was simple. Utilities got split down the middle and we'd take turns paying, then square up at the end of the month. But in November, I got a call from the electric company saying we were 2 months behind. I knew I'd paid my share, had the bank statements to prove it. When I confronted Jason, he pulled out this manila folder full of receipts and carbon copies, everything organized by date with little sticky notes. He showed me his records of my payments, and somehow, according to his documentation, I'd missed October entirely. The thing is, his handwriting on those carbon copies looked nothing like mine, but it was close enough that someone who didn't know better might believe it. He even had a copy of a note I'd supposedly left him saying I'd pay him back later. I'd never written any note. December brought the real nightmare. I woke up one morning to find Jason in the kitchen, talking on the phone in this low, concerned voice. He kept glancing at me while he spoke, and I caught fragments: aggressive behavior, worried about my safety, documentation. When he hung up, he told me it was his mother, but I'd seen the property management company's number on his phone screen. That afternoon, I got an email from our landlord, Mrs. Peterson, asking me to come to her office to discuss recent complaints. My mouth went dry reading it. The old woman usually only contacted us when rent was due, and I'd never been late. Not once. When I knocked on Jason's door to ask what was going on, he opened it just a crack, the chain still on, and said he didn't feel comfortable discussing it without a neutral third party present. The meeting with Mrs. Peterson was surreal. She had a folder on her desk, thicker than it should have been for tenants who'd lived there less than a year. Inside were typed complaints, dated and detailed, describing incidents that had never happened. According to these documents, I'd been pounding on Jason's door at 3 a.m. demanding he turn down music that wasn't playing. I'd allegedly thrown a plate at him during an argument about dishes. There was even a complaint about me bringing suspicious people to the apartment at all hours. Each report was signed by Jason in the same precise handwriting I'd grown to recognize. But here's what really got me. There were photos. Blurry phone pictures of broken dishes on the kitchen floor. A hole in the wall I'd never seen before. Even one of Jason with what looked like a bruise on his arm. Mrs. Peterson's expression was grave as she flipped through each page, occasionally glancing up at me like she was trying to reconcile the person in front of her with the monster described in those papers. I tried to explain, but how do you defend yourself against things that never happened? Every denial sounded weak, desperate. Mrs. Peterson listened with that neutral face people wear when they've already made up their minds. She said she'd have to investigate further, but warned that one more incident would result in eviction proceedings. One more incident of things I wasn't doing. Walking back to the apartment, I felt like I was stepping into a trap. Jason's door was open when I got there, and he was sitting on his bed, visible from the hallway, talking loudly on the phone again. "Yes, I've been documenting everything," he said, making sure I could hear. "No, I don't feel safe, but I can't afford to move yet." He made eye contact with me as he said it, and there was something in his expression. Not fear, not anger, but satisfaction. Like watching a chess piece fall exactly where he'd planned. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment made me tense up, wondering if Jason was creating more evidence. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement in the kitchen and found him taking pictures of our sink full of dishes. My dishes, which I'd planned to wash in the morning. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. "Just documenting the state of common areas," he said calmly, like taking photos in the middle of the night was perfectly normal. I watched him arrange the dishes to look worse, stacking them precariously, even adding a few from his own cupboard. When I protested, he held up his phone, already recording. "Please stop harassing me," he said loudly, clearly. "I've asked you multiple times to respect my boundaries." I stood there in my boxers and t-shirt, realizing how this would look on camera, me confronting him in the middle of the night while he documented my mess. I went back to my room and started searching for new apartments on my phone until sunrise. The next few days were a paranoid blur. I started documenting everything too, taking pictures of clean dishes, recording myself taking out the trash, even filming myself quietly closing doors. At work, I could barely focus. Jason worked the evening shift, so our paths rarely crossed there, but I started asking coworkers about him. Most barely knew he existed. One woman, Brenda from accounting, mentioned something odd though. She said Jason had been asking HR about hostile work environment policies and whether incidents at home between coworkers could affect employment. My stomach churned. He wasn't just trying to get me evicted, he was building a case to get me fired too. I spent my lunch break in my car, calling every apartment listing I could afford, but December was a terrible time to find housing. Everything was either taken or required first month, last month, and security deposit. Money I didn't have because I'd been paying for bills Jason claimed I'd missed. Friday evening changed everything. I came home to find my laptop missing from my locked bedroom. The door was still locked, no signs of forced entry, but my window was cracked open about 2 inches, something I never did in winter. My laptop had everything: bank statements, personal photos, work files, passwords saved in the browser. I called the police immediately, but when they arrived, Jason emerged from his room with a concerned expression and my laptop in his hands. He told the officers he'd found it in the shared living room that morning and was keeping it safe until I got home. He showed them text messages on his phone, messages I'd never sent, where I'd apparently asked him to grab it for me. The officers looked at me with that same expression Mrs. Peterson had worn. One of them pulled me aside and quietly suggested I might want to talk to someone about stress management. They left without filing a report. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my bed with a baseball bat across my lap, My phone recording everything, waiting. Around 4 a.m., I heard the soft scrape of metal on metal, the sound of someone picking a lock. My doorknob turned slowly, testing. I held my breath, gripping the bat tighter, but the door held. Then I heard footsteps moving away, and Jason's door clicking shut. In the morning, I found tiny scratches around my lock that hadn't been there before. I packed whatever I could fit in my car that day: clothes, important documents, anything valuable. I'd decided to leave, lease or no lease, consequences be damned. But when I went to grab my birth certificate from my filing cabinet, I found something that made my whole body go cold. It was a life insurance policy application, partially filled out in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't. The beneficiary, Jason Miller. The policy amount, $500,000. Clipped to it was a photocopy of my driver's license and social security card, documents I kept locked in that same cabinet. I drove straight to the police station with everything: the fake insurance papers, photos of the scratched lock, screenshots of my real bank statements. The detective who listened to my story was more receptive than the uniforms had been, especially when I showed him the insurance application. He said they'd investigate, gave me a case number, told me to find somewhere else to stay immediately. I checked into a motel that night using cash, didn't tell anyone where I was. The next morning, the detective called. They'd brought Jason in for questioning, and he'd admitted to everything, but not in the way you'd think. He claimed it was all performance art, that he was studying human psychology and stress responses for a thesis project. He had notebooks full of observations about me, detailed plans for each escalation, even graphs tracking my behavioral changes. The detective said Jason seemed genuinely confused why everyone was so upset, kept insisting he would have revealed everything before the insurance policy was actually submitted. They charged him with identity theft and attempted fraud. I never went back to the apartment, just paid someone to get my stuff while Jason was in custody. Last I heard, he'd been fired from the call center and evicted by Mrs. Peterson, who was mortified when she learned the truth. I still triple-check my locks and keep my important documents in a safety deposit box. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found those insurance papers when I did. Portland gets quiet in August, and that's exactly why I'd chosen that week to visit my brother in Colorado. I was 28, working at a marketing firm downtown, and after 3 years of sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with Melissa, I'd finally saved enough for a real vacation. Melissa was the ideal roommate, a night shift nurse who kept her space clean, never brought drama home, and actually remembered to buy toilet paper when we ran out. Our apartment wasn't fancy, just a 3rd-floor walk-up with creaky floors and windows that stuck in the humidity, but it was home. I'd spent the previous weekend cleaning everything, labeling my leftovers in the fridge, and making sure my succulent collection had enough water to survive 7 days without me. Coming home from vacation always hits different, that mix of post-trip exhaustion and the comfort of your own bed calling your name. I dragged my suitcase up those 3 flights of stairs, already planning which takeout place I'd order from while unpacking. But when I pushed open our apartment door, there was a man sitting on our couch. Not just any man. Someone I'd never seen before, wearing nothing but basketball shorts and eating cereal from my favorite bowl, the one with the little painted sunflowers around the rim. He looked up at me with this completely casual expression, like I was the one who didn't belong there, and just nodded before turning back to whatever he was watching on our TV. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I stood there in the doorway, still gripping my suitcase handle, trying to make sense of this stranger in my living room. He was probably in his early 30s with this patchy beard that looked like he'd given up halfway through growing it, and there were empty beer bottles lined up on the coffee table, my craft beers that I'd been saving for a special occasion. The whole apartment smelled different too, like cologne mixed with something else I couldn't place, maybe incense or those weird vape pens. Before I could say anything, Melissa came out of her room, already in her scrubs for her shift. She saw me, and her face did this thing where she tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace, and I knew immediately that she'd been hoping to deal with this situation before I got back. "Oh, hey, you're home early," she said, which was bullshit because I'd texted her my flight details days ago. She gestured vaguely at the man on our couch, who still hadn't bothered to introduce himself or even put on a shirt. "This is my cousin Todd. He's just crashing here for a few nights while he figures out his living situation." The way she said it, rushed and without making eye contact, told me everything I needed to know about this cousin story. But I was too tired to start an argument right then, and Melissa was already grabbing her bag and keys, mumbling something about being late for work. She practically ran out the door, leaving me alone with Todd, who had now helped himself to what looked like my leftover Thai food from the fridge. That first night, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe Melissa really did have some cousin I'd never heard about in 3 years of living together. I locked my bedroom door, something I'd never done before, and attempted to get some sleep. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to footsteps in the hallway. Not normal walking, but this slow, deliberate pacing right outside my door. The footsteps would stop directly in front of my room, and I could see the shadow of feet in the gap under the door. Then nothing for maybe 30 seconds before the pacing would start again. This went on for at least an hour. I lay there completely still, texting Melissa, who obviously didn't respond because she was at work. The doorknob to my room jiggled once, very gently, like someone was testing if it was locked. After that, the footsteps moved away, and I heard him go into the bathroom. He was in there for an ungodly amount of time, and when he finally left, I noticed he hadn't flushed. The next morning, things got weirder. I came out of my room to find Todd had rearranged our living room furniture. The couch was pushed against a different wall. My bookshelf had been moved to block part of the window, and he'd taken down several of my framed photos from the walls. He was sitting at our kitchen table using my laptop, which I knew I'd left closed on my desk, scrolling through what looked like apartment listings. "Morning," he said without looking up, like we were old friends. "Made coffee if you want some." It was my coffee, my French press, even my favorite mug sitting next to him. But what really made my skin crawl was seeing my bathroom stuff had been touched. My expensive face wash was nearly empty. There were beard trimmings all over the sink, and my toothbrush, the electric one I just bought, was wet. Not damp from the humidity, but wet like someone had just used it. I confronted him right there in the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady even though I wanted to scream. "Todd, you can't use my personal things. And why did you move all the furniture?" He looked at me with these pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink enough, tilting his head like I was speaking a foreign language. "Just making the space more feng shui," he said, then added, "Energy flows better this way. You'll sleep better too." The way he said that last part, specifically mentioning my sleep, made every hair on my arm stand up. I told him he needed to put everything back and stay out of my room, my bathroom items, everything. He just smiled. Not a normal smile, but this tight-lipped thing that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Sure thing, roomie." The way he drew out that last word made me want to bleach every surface in the apartment. Melissa didn't come home that morning after her shift, which she always did. Instead, I got a text saying she was staying at a friend's place to catch up on sleep. Convenient. I spent the day working from home, too uncomfortable to leave Todd alone in the apartment with my belongings. Every time I left my room to use the bathroom or grab water, he was doing something bizarre. Once I caught him standing in the hallway, running his fingers along the wall like he was measuring something. Another time he was in the kitchen, smelling each of our spice jars and making notes in this little leather notebook. But the worst was when I came out to find him sitting on the floor of Melissa's room, her door wide open, going through what looked like paperwork. "Just helping Mel organize," he said when he saw me watching. "She's always been scattered, even as kids." Except here's the thing. When I texted Melissa asking when exactly Todd was leaving, she finally admitted they weren't actually cousins. She'd found him on some roommate matching app when she was worried about making rent while I was gone. The truth made everything worse. This complete stranger had been in our apartment for a week, and Melissa had straight up lied about it. When I demanded she come home to deal with this, she kept making excuses, extra shifts, feeling sick, car trouble. Meanwhile, Todd was settling in like he'd lived there for years. He started receiving packages, had food delivered at all hours, and I even caught him giving our address to someone on the phone while talking about showing them his new place. On day 3 of my being back, I woke up at 4 a.m. to find my bedroom door wide open. I knew I'd locked it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I crept to the doorway. Todd was sitting in my desk chair, in the dark, just facing my bed. When I flicked on the light and shouted, "What the fuck are you doing?" He stood up slowly and said he was checking if I needed extra blankets because the AC seemed cold. He walked past me, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine, and I could smell that same sickly sweet vape smell mixed with something sour. That's when I decided I was done playing nice. I called Melissa and told her either Todd left immediately or I was calling the police. She finally admitted the real problem. She'd taken a deposit from him, spent it already on her credit card bills, and Todd had apparently paid for a full month up front through the app. Legally, she said, he might actually have rights to stay. I hung up on her and called the landlord, but he just said it was between us roommates to sort out. So there I was, trapped in my own apartment with this man who kept pushing boundaries further each day. That afternoon, while Todd was in the shower, using my shampoo naturally, I went through his stuff. Just a duffel bag and a backpack, but what I found made me pack my own bags immediately. There were printouts of our apartment listing from months ago, with notes written in the margins, photos of our building from different angles, including my bedroom window from the street. And worst of all, a notebook filled with observations. When I usually left for work, when Melissa had her shifts, details about our routines that meant he'd been watching us long before he ever moved in. I grabbed my essentials and went straight to my friend Natalie's place across town. From there, I made calls to the police, who said without evidence of an actual crime, it was a civil matter, to a lawyer friend who confirmed that Todd might indeed have tenant rights after paying Melissa, and finally to my dad, who drove up from Eugene that same night. The next morning, my dad and I went back to the apartment with 2 of his construction buddies. Todd was there, sitting in the living room like he owned the place, but his whole demeanor changed when he saw I hadn't come alone. My dad, bless him, didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there, all 6'3" of him, and explained that Todd had exactly 1 hour to pack his things and leave. He mentioned something about knowing the building inspector personally, and how interesting they'd find the illegal subletting situation. Todd tried to argue about his rights, pulled out his phone to show the rental agreement with Melissa. But my dad's construction buddies just started moving Todd's belongings to the hallway. The whole thing took less than 45 minutes. Todd packed up his duffel bag and backpack, muttering about lawsuits and rental laws, but he left. We changed the locks that afternoon. Turns out Melissa had given him a copy of her keys, and I spent the next 2 days deep cleaning everything he might have touched. Melissa never came back. She sent her brother to get her stuff a week later, couldn't even face me herself. I found out later she'd moved back with her parents, probably too ashamed to deal with what she'd put me through. The landlord let me break the lease without penalty, after I showed him the stalking materials I'd found in Todd's bag. I moved to a studio apartment downtown, one with a doorman and security cameras. Sometimes I still think about those notes Todd had written, how long he'd been watching us, planning his way in. But mostly, I'm just grateful for that moment when I decided to go through his things, because who knows how much worse it could have gotten if I'd stayed. Everything started going sideways about 3 months after I moved into that apartment complex in Phoenix. I was 26, working remote as a graphic designer, and desperate to cut my rent costs after my previous lease ended. The complex wasn't fancy, just a standard 3-story building with maybe 40 units total. But it was clean, quiet, and the price was right when split between 2 people. I found my roommate, Brandon, through a Facebook marketplace ad he'd posted looking for someone to share his 2-bedroom unit. He seemed completely normal during our initial coffee meetup. Early 30s, worked night shifts at a warehouse, kept to himself but was friendly enough when we crossed paths. The first couple months were actually great. He paid rent on time, kept the common areas clean, and we'd occasionally share a beer on the balcony while talking about basketball or whatever was on Netflix. The weird stuff began on a Thursday morning in late September, when I woke up to heavy knocking on our door. 2 police officers stood there asking if we'd seen or heard anything unusual the previous night. Apparently, someone had broken into 3 apartments in our building, all on different floors, and stolen electronics, jewelry, and cash. The officers mentioned the break-ins happened between midnight and 4 a.m., always through unlocked windows or sliding doors. I told them I hadn't heard anything since I'd been dead asleep with my noise machine on, and Brandon had been at work during those hours anyway. They took my statement, gave me a card, and reminded me to keep all windows locked. As I closed the door, this uncomfortable tightness settled in my chest. Our complex had always felt so safe. Most residents were young professionals or retired couples who'd lived there for years. The thought of someone creeping through our hallways at night, testing doorknobs and windows, made my skin crawl. Over the next few weeks, more break-ins happened, always following the same pattern. The thief would hit 2 or 3 units in a single night, always between midnight and dawn, always through windows or balcony doors that residents had forgotten to lock. The complex's group chat exploded with paranoid messages and theories. Mrs. Gonzalez from 2B swore she saw a shadow figure in the parking lot. The college kids in 3F installed a Ring camera that only captured blurry footage of possums. What struck me as odd was how the burglar seemed to know exactly which apartments to target. They never attempted locked windows, never triggered any alarms, and somehow avoided every unit with dogs. It was like they had inside knowledge of our building's routines and vulnerabilities. I started double-checking our locks obsessively, even bought one of those security bars for the sliding door. Brandon thought I was overreacting, laughing it off whenever I mentioned the break-ins. "Dude, we're on the 2nd floor and I'm here half the night anyway," he'd say, tossing his warehouse uniform into the laundry basket. "No one's stupid enough to mess with our place." That's when I started noticing Brandon's schedule wasn't as consistent as he claimed. Sure, he left for work around 10 p.m. most nights, but sometimes I'd hear him come back way earlier than his supposed 6 a.m. shift end. He'd always have some explanation ready. Slow night at the warehouse, supervisor let them leave early. Equipment malfunction shut down their section. Reasonable enough, except these early returns started coinciding with the mornings when I'd wake up to police sirens and neighbors gathering in the hallway, whispering about another break-in. I told myself I was being paranoid. That correlation didn't mean causation, but then I noticed other things. Brandon always wore these thin black athletic gloves when he came home, claiming his hands got torn up from handling boxes. He carried the same faded green backpack everywhere, even for quick trips to the convenience store, and would get weirdly defensive if I asked to borrow it. Once I saw him organizing its contents on the kitchen counter. Among the usual stuff like phone chargers and energy drinks, there was a flathead screwdriver, a small flashlight, and what looked like thin pieces of metal that could have been lockpicks. The paranoia really kicked in during the first week of October. I'd started working later into the evenings, trying to finish a big project for a client, which meant I was awake when Brandon would leave for his shifts. One night, I watched from my bedroom window as he walked to his beat-up Corolla in the parking lot. But instead of driving away, he just sat there in the dark for about 20 minutes. Then he got out, backpack slung over one shoulder, and walked right back toward our building. I ducked away from the window, heart pounding, waiting to hear his key in our lock. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. I crept to the living room and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Where the hell had he gone? I stayed up another 2 hours pretending to work on my laptop in the living room until finally I heard footsteps on our balcony. The sliding door rattled softly, and there was Brandon, slipping inside like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Forgot my wallet," he said when he saw me, patting his pockets. "Had to come back through the balcony because I locked myself out." But I'd heard him take his keys when he left. and his wallet was sitting right there on the kitchen counter where it had been all evening. I wanted to confront him, but something held me back. Maybe the way his eyes had gone flat when he'd seen me sitting there, or how his jaw muscles tightened when I mentioned I'd been working late. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every time he left, every time he returned, what he was wearing, what he was carrying. I felt like a crazy person, keeping a notebook hidden under my mattress like some paranoid conspiracy theorist. But the pattern was undeniable. October 9th. Brandon leaves at 11:47 p.m., returns at 2:15 a.m. through the balcony, break-in reported in Building C. October 13th. Leaves at 12:30 a.m., back at 3:45 a.m. through the front door this time, 2 units hid in Building A. October 16th. Doesn't leave at all, claims he called in sick, no break-ins reported. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was piling up. I even started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a baseball bat next to my bed. The worst part was pretending everything was normal during our occasional interactions, talking about the weather while making coffee, splitting the electric bill, acting like I didn't suspect my roommate was terrorizing our neighbors while they slept. Things escalated on October 22nd. I'd fallen asleep on the couch around 1 a.m., laptop still warm on my chest, when a soft scraping sound pulled me from unconsciousness. Through barely open eyes, I watched Brandon creep through our living room, moving with practiced silence. He wasn't wearing his work uniform. Instead, he had on all black athletic wear and those damn gloves. The scraping sound came from him sliding open our balcony door just wide enough to slip through. I forced myself to stay still, breathing deep and even like I was still asleep, while every muscle in my body tensed. After counting to 30, I rolled off the couch and crawled to the balcony door, peering through the vertical blinds. Brandon was already gone, but I could see a shadow moving along the walkway of the 3rd floor. Then I saw him pause outside apartment 3G, the Johnsons' place. They were an elderly couple who'd mentioned at the mailboxes last week that they were visiting their daughter in Seattle. My mouth went dry as I watched Brandon pull something from his backpack, hunching over their window for maybe 30 seconds before it slid open smooth as butter. I sat there paralyzed, watching my roommate disappear into the Johnsons' dark apartment. Part of me wanted to call 911 right then, but what if I was wrong? What if he had some legitimate reason to be there? Maybe they'd asked him to water their plants or grab their mail. Even as I thought it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. Nobody asks their neighbor's sketchy roommate to break into their apartment at 1:30 a.m. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark, while I wrestled with what to do. Then Brandon emerged, maybe 10 minutes later, his backpack noticeably fuller than before. He closed the window behind him, wiped down the frame with his sleeve, and melted back into the shadows. I scrambled back to the couch, throwing myself down and forcing my breathing to slow just as our balcony door whispered open again. Through slitted eyes, I watched him scan the room, checking if I'd moved. Satisfied, he padded past me toward his bedroom. I heard his door click shut, followed by the muffled sounds of drawers opening and closing. The next morning, I overheard Mrs. Johnson sobbing in the hallway, telling anyone who'd listen about her missing jewelry box, the one with her mother's wedding ring and the watch her late husband had given her for their 40th anniversary. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. That afternoon, while Brandon was supposedly at the gym, I called the police tip line from my car in a grocery store parking lot. My voice shook as I explained everything, the matching patterns, the gloves, the tools, and finally what I'd witnessed the night before. The detective who took my report sounded skeptical at first, probably used to paranoid neighbors pointing fingers at each other. But when I mentioned specific dates and times that matched their break-in reports, his tone shifted. He asked if I could document anything else, maybe get photos of the suspicious items in Brandon's backpack or catch him in the act again. "We need something concrete," he said. "Right now, it's all circumstantial." He gave me his direct number and told me to call immediately if I saw anything else. Driving back to the apartment, I felt like I was returning to a lion's den. How was I supposed to live with someone I knew was stealing from our neighbors, people who smiled at us in the elevator, who held the door when our arms were full of groceries? But I couldn't move out without raising Brandon's suspicions, and the police needed more evidence. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. I'd lie in bed fully dressed, listening for any movement from Brandon's room. He seemed to sense something had shifted. Our conversations became even more sparse, limited to grunts and nods when we passed in the kitchen. On the 4th night, October 26th, I was ready. I'd positioned my phone on a bookshelf in the living room, hidden behind some old textbooks recording video aimed at the balcony door. Around 12:45 a.m., I heard Brandon's bedroom door creak open. I stayed in my room, ear pressed against my door, listening to his footsteps pause outside. Was he checking if I was asleep? After what felt like hours but was probably 30 seconds, I heard the familiar whisper of the balcony door. I crept out and watched through my cracked bedroom door as he disappeared into the night. This time, I was ready. I grabbed my car keys and slipped out our front door, taking the stairs down to the parking lot. From behind a dumpster, I had a clear view of Building B across the courtyard. Sure enough, there was Brandon, spider climbing up to a second-floor balcony using the decorative lattice work. He jimmied the sliding door with something from his backpack, took him less than a minute, and vanished inside. I called the detective's number with trembling fingers, whispering frantically about Brandon being inside Building B, second floor, northwest corner unit. He told me to get somewhere safe and that units were on the way. Do not approach, do not try to confront him. I ducked back inside our building's lobby, positioning myself where I could see both the parking lot and our building's entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited. 6 minutes later, the longest 6 minutes of my life, 2 police cars rolled in, silent, no lights or sirens. 4 officers got out and moved quickly toward Building B. I watched them disappear around the corner, heading for the stairs. Then nothing, just silence and the distant hum of the highway. I stood there clutching my phone, half expecting Brandon to come strolling back like nothing had happened. Then the night exploded with shouts and radio chatter. Through the window, I saw Brandon burst out of Building B's side door, backpack bouncing as he sprinted toward the back of the complex. 2 officers gave chase while the others ran for their vehicles. I heard rather than saw the takedown, scuffling sounds, more shouting, and then Brandon's voice, high and panicked, insisting they had the wrong guy. They brought him past our building in handcuffs about 20 minutes later. Under the harsh parking lot lights, Brandon looked smaller somehow, his face pale and sweaty. He saw me standing in the lobby window and our eyes met for just a second. No anger there, just this weird blankness like he was looking through me. The detective called me an hour later to take my full statement. Turns out Brandon had been hitting apartment complexes all over the area for months, maybe longer. They found stolen goods from at least 15 break-ins when they searched his room. Jewelry, electronics, even someone's coin collection. The kicker? He actually did work at that warehouse, but only part-time. The rest of his income came from selling stolen goods online. He'd specifically chosen our complex because of the demographic. Lots of elderly residents and young professionals with predictable schedules. And he'd picked me as a roommate because my work-from-home schedule meant I'd be asleep during his prime hunting hours. I moved out 3 days later, crashing on a friend's couch until I found a studio apartment across town. Sometimes I still wake up at night, convinced I hear someone testing my windows. But at least now when I triple-check my locks, I know exactly why I'm doing it. Finding affordable housing in Chicago during the summer of 2022 felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. I'd just graduated from nursing school and landed my first job at Northwestern Memorial, but with student loans breathing down my neck, I needed something cheap and fast. That's when I stumbled across the Craigslist ad. Furnished room in quiet neighborhood, utilities included, $600 month. The photos showed a clean, spacious bedroom with hardwood floors and plenty of natural light. The owner, a guy named Carl who said he worked in IT, responded within minutes. During our phone call, he sounded professional and mentioned he'd been renting to medical professionals for years because he appreciated their steady schedules and quiet lifestyles. The day I moved in, Carl greeted me at the door wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, looking every bit the suburban professional he claimed to be. He was probably in his early 40s with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an almost scholarly appearance. He helped carry my boxes upstairs, pointing out the shared bathroom, explaining the laundry schedule, and showing me where he kept extra towels and cleaning supplies. The house itself was immaculate, almost eerily so. Every surface gleamed, every book on the shelf stood perfectly aligned, and the air smelled faintly of pine cleaner mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. He mentioned he'd lived there alone since his divorce 3 years ago, and preferred having a roommate for the extra income and company. The first week went smoothly enough. Carl worked from home, but he kept to his office most of the day, only emerging for meals and the occasional small talk in the kitchen. He'd ask about my shifts at the hospital, recommend local restaurants, and share bits about the neighborhood's history. One evening, while I was making dinner after a 12-hour shift, he appeared in the doorway holding 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might need this after dealing with patients all day," he said, that eager-to-please smile stretching across his face. I accepted politely, though I really just wanted to eat and crash. We sat at the kitchen table while he launched into stories about his travels to Eastern Europe, his collection of vintage computers, and his thoughts on the best jogging routes in the area. His enthusiasm was almost overwhelming, but I chalked it up to him being lonely after living alone for so long. By the second week, the dinner invitations became more frequent. "There's this new Thai place that just opened," he'd say, hovering by my door. "Or I got us tickets to the architecture boat tour this Saturday." Each time I declined, citing exhaustion, prior plans, or needing to study for my certification exams, his face would tighten just slightly before returning to that practiced smile. The rejection seemed to accumulate in the air between us like static electricity. He started leaving passive-aggressive notes about dishes left in the sink for more than an hour, or how the front door needed to be locked a specific way. One morning I found a printed article about roommate etiquette, taped to the refrigerator, with certain lines highlighted in yellow. "Good roommates make time for household bonding," and "living together requires mutual effort and engagement." The atmosphere in the house shifted like a barometric pressure drop before a storm. Carl's footsteps grew heavier on the stairs, and he'd started timing his exits from his office to coincide with my arrivals home. He'd be waiting in the kitchen, always with some comment about my schedule or appearance. "Those scrubs make you look tired," he'd observe, or "Working nights again? That's not healthy for a young woman." His tone carried a strange mixture of concern and condescension that made my skin crawl. I started changing at the hospital before coming home, taking longer routes, anything to minimize our interactions, but he seemed to track my patterns, adjusting his own schedule accordingly. The house began to feel less like a home, and more like a cage where I was constantly being observed. That's when I decided to install a lock on my bedroom door. It seemed like a reasonable precaution. Lots of people with roommates had bedroom locks, right? I picked up a simple deadbolt from Home Depot on my day off, waiting until Carl left for what he called his weekly grocery run to install it. The whole process took maybe 20 minutes, and I felt an immediate sense of relief when I heard that satisfying click of the bolt sliding into place. But when Carl returned, the sound of grocery bags hitting the counter was followed by an ominous silence. I heard his footsteps climb the stairs, pause outside my door, then continue to his room. For the rest of that evening, the house was eerily quiet, except for the occasional slam of a cabinet door or the aggressive clatter of dishes in the sink. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of my doorknob rattling. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. in angry red numbers. The rattling stopped, followed by a soft knock, then another, harder. "Hey, we need to talk about the lock." Carl's voice came through the door, thick and slurred. The smell of bourbon seeped through the gap under the door like fog. "This is my house, my property. You can't just make modifications without discussing it." His words tumbled over each other, punctuated by the occasional hiccup. I lay perfectly still, hoping he'd think I was asleep and go away. But the knocking turned to pounding, each blow making the door frame shudder. "I know you're awake. Your light was on 5 minutes ago." How did he know that? My blackout curtains were drawn tight. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes before I heard him stumble back to his room, muttering something about ungrateful bitches. The next morning I found him in the kitchen making coffee as if nothing had happened. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt pressed, that familiar smile plastered across his face. "Morning. Hope I didn't wake you last night. I had a bit too much at my book club." He slid a mug across the counter toward me. "Peace offering?" I stared at the coffee, noticing how his hand lingered near mine, how his eyes tracked my every movement. That's when I spotted it, a small white device plugged into the outlet behind the toaster. It looked exactly like one of those plug-in air fresheners, complete with a little vented top, but something about it seemed wrong. The brand name was generic, almost blurry, and there was a tiny pinhole in the center that caught the morning light. My pulse quickened as I remembered seeing identical devices throughout the house. One in the living room, another in the hallway outside the bathroom, even one at the top of the stairs. I made an excuse about being late for work and retreated to my room, immediately Googling hidden cameras that look like air fresheners. The results made my stomach churn. Page after page of spy cameras designed to look exactly like what I'd seen, complete with motion detection and live streaming capabilities. Some even had night vision and audio recording. I thought about all the times I'd walked through those common areas in just a towel after showering, all the phone conversations I'd had in the living room, all the moments I thought I'd had privacy. But I needed proof before I could do anything. That afternoon, while Carl was on a conference call, I crept downstairs and carefully unplugged the device in the kitchen. Sure enough, behind the fake vented cover was a tiny camera lens and an SD card slot. My hands trembled as I plugged it back in, trying to position it exactly as I'd found it. I knew I had to get out, but I also needed evidence. That evening, I waited until Carl went to bed before searching the house more thoroughly. In the basement, behind some old moving boxes, I found a plastic storage bin that made my blood turn to ice. Inside were dozens of SD cards, each labeled with a woman's first name and a date range. Ashley 2019-2020, Jenna 2020-2021, Diane 2021-2022. There were printed screenshots too, women in various states of undress, captured in the very rooms I'd been living in. Some of the photos had notes written on the back in Carl's neat handwriting. Declined dinner 3x. Installed door lock. Moved out suddenly. The most recent label read Courtney 2022, with an end date just 2 months before I'd moved in. At the bottom of the bin was a manila folder containing rental applications, all from young women, all with their social media profiles printed and attached. Mine was on top. I used my phone to photograph everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. The flash seemed impossibly bright in the darkness of the basement, and every creak of the house made me jump. I carefully returned everything to its original position and crept back upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. In my room, I immediately emailed the photos to myself and a trusted friend, then started packing. I couldn't stay another night. But as I was shoving clothes into my duffel bag, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside my door. "Found my storage bin, did you?" Carl's voice was different now. No slurring, no fake friendliness, just cold and matter-of-fact. "The camera in the basement has night vision. I've been watching you on my phone this whole time." The doorknob rattled against the lock. "You know, Ashley tried to go to the police. They didn't believe her. No evidence," she said. "Funny how SD cards can just disappear." I called 911 while barricading the door with my dresser, whispering urgently to the dispatcher as Carl continued his monologue outside. "Courtney was my favorite, you know, so trusting. She didn't even notice the cameras for 3 months. But you, You're observant. I like that, makes it more interesting. He was pressing something against the door now, and I heard the distinct sound of a drill. He was removing the lock from the outside. I screamed into the phone for the police to hurry, then grabbed the can of pepper spray from my purse and positioned myself by the window. The drill stopped, followed by the sound of metal hitting the floor. As the door swung open, revealing Carl's silhouette backlit by the hallway light, I made a split-second decision. I sprayed directly at his face and dove past him, running full speed down the stairs and out the front door into the night. I didn't stop running until I saw the police lights turning onto the street. The police found everything: the cameras, the storage bin, even additional hidden drives in his office containing thousands of hours of footage. Carl was arrested that night, and during the investigation, they tracked down 14 women who had rented from him over the past 5 years. I testified at his trial 6 months later, sitting in the courtroom with several other women who'd lived through the same nightmare. He got 8 years in prison and had to register as a sex offender. I never found out what happened to all the footage he'd taken of me during those 3 weeks, and that still haunts me sometimes. These days, I live in a studio apartment with 2 deadbolts, a security system, and a thorough background check on my landlord. I check every outlet, every smoke detector, every air freshener twice. My friends think I'm paranoid when I inspect their places too, but I just tell them you can never be too careful. The thing that disturbs me most is how normal Carl seemed, how he'd perfected his act over years of practice. It makes me wonder how many other Carls are out there, hiding behind Craigslist ads and friendly smiles, waiting for the next young woman who just needs an affordable place to live. The spring semester of 2023 started with me desperate for housing near campus. Every place I checked was either too expensive or already taken, until I spotted an ad on the university housing board. 3 blocks from my classes, rent split 2 ways, utilities included. It seemed perfect. My potential roommate, Steven, suggested we meet at a coffee shop downtown to discuss arrangements. He was maybe mid-20s, thin build, worked night shifts at some pharmaceutical lab across town. During our conversation, he kept emphasizing how much he valued peace and quiet in his living space. I assured him I was a serious engineering student, not the party type, mostly kept to myself. We shook hands on the deal that afternoon. What I didn't notice then was how his jaw clenched every time the espresso machine hissed, or how his fingers tapped nervously against his thigh whenever someone's phone buzzed nearby. The first week went smoothly enough. Steven kept odd hours due to his job, leaving around 9 p.m. and returning near dawn. Our schedules barely overlapped, which seemed ideal. I'd hear him moving around the kitchen in the early morning, making his breakfast while I was still asleep. Then he'd disappear into his room until evening. The apartment was nice, nothing fancy, but clean and spacious. My room faced the street while his was at the back, overlooking an alley. He'd already been living there for 6 months before I moved in, and the common areas reflected his personality. Minimal furniture, no decorations, everything organized with almost clinical precision. The only personal touch was a small whiteboard by the front door, where he'd leave notes about shared expenses or maintenance issues. Problems started with my alarm clock. I had an 8 a.m. thermodynamics class on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which meant setting my phone alarm for 6:45 to give myself time to shower and grab breakfast. The first Monday of the semester, my alarm went off as usual. Nothing loud, just the standard iPhone chime. 20 minutes later, I found a note slipped under my door, written in small, cramped handwriting. Please consider using vibration mode for alarms. Some of us are trying to sleep after working all night. S. Fair enough, I thought. He worked nights, needed his rest. I switched to vibrate and thought that would be the end of it. Except my phone, placed on the wooden nightstand, made this buzzing sound against the wood that apparently traveled through the walls. The next note was less polite. The vibration is worse than the sound. Can hear it through the wall. Must stop. I tried everything to accommodate him. Bought a thick rubber mat to place under my phone, thinking it would absorb the vibration. Started putting the phone under my pillow, though I worried about sleeping through the alarm. Even bought one of those sunrise simulation alarm clocks that wake you with gradual light instead of sound. Nothing satisfied Stephen. The notes kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. He started leaving them in strange places, tucked into my textbooks, taped to my laptop screen, even once inside a cereal box I'd just opened. The handwriting got messier, more erratic. One particularly disturbing note simply read, "Every sound you make is recorded. Every single one." I started noticing things around the apartment too. My electronics would act strangely. My laptop would randomly shut down. My phone would lose charge overnight even when plugged in. My wireless headphones would disconnect constantly. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in early March. I'd been up late studying for a midterm, finally crashed around 2 a.m., and made sure to set 3 different alarms on my phone just to be safe: 6:30, 6:45, and 7 hours. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through my window, way brighter than it should have been at 6:30. My phone showed 10:47 a.m. All 3 alarms were gone, completely deleted from my phone. Not snoozed, not turned off, deleted. My heart started racing as I realized I'd missed my thermodynamics midterm, worth 30% of my grade. But that wasn't the worst part. When I tried to open my bedroom door, it wouldn't budge. The handle turned, but the door itself was stuck, like something was wedged against it from the outside. I pushed harder, putting my shoulder into it, and heard something scraping against the floor on the other side. Then I smelled it. Gas. Natural gas. Unmistakable and getting stronger by the second. My window faced the street 3 floors up. No fire escape. The door was my only way out. Panic took over and I started ramming the door with everything I had, yelling for help. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, whatever was blocking the door gave way. Turned out to be a metal bar Stephen had wedged under the handle. I stumbled into the hallway and saw the kitchen at the end. All 4 burners on the stove turned on but unlit, just releasing gas into the apartment. I ran over, shut them off, and threw open every window I could find. Stephen's bedroom door was open, his room empty, bed perfectly made like always. But on his desk I found something that made my skin crawl. 3 notebooks, filled cover to cover with his handwriting. The first pages were just logs, detailed records of every sound I made, time-stamped down to the second. 3:47 a.m. Subject closed bathroom door too loudly. 11:23 p.m. Subject's typing speed indicates anger or frustration. But as the entries went on, they got darker. The second notebook was filled with what he called correction methods. Detailed plans for teaching people lessons about noise pollution. Some entries described past roommates. Apparently, I wasn't his first victim. One entry from 6 months earlier talked about a girl named Amy who played music too loud. Replaced her speaker wires with defective ones. Watching her frustration as they cut out randomly was satisfying, but not enough. She moved out before phase 2. Another entry detailed how he'd tampered with a previous roommate's car alarm, making it go off at random times until the guy was evicted for noise complaints. But the entries about me were the most detailed. Pages and pages analyzing my sleep patterns, my study habits. Which sounds bothered him most. He'd drawn diagrams of the apartment showing how sound traveled through the walls, had calculations for the exact decibel levels of my footsteps on different parts of the floor. The third notebook was the worst. Fantasy scenarios, each more violent than the last, about what he wanted to do to people who disturbed his peace. The gas wasn't even his most elaborate plan for me. One entry, dated just 2 days earlier, described how he'd considered loosening the bolts on my desk chair so it would collapse during a study session, hopefully causing me to hit my head on the desk edge. Another detailed plan involved contaminating my food with syrup of ipecac to make me violently ill before an important exam. The last entry, written in larger, more agitated script, simply said, "Tomorrow morning, no more alarms. Ever." I grabbed all 3 notebooks and got out of there, called 911 from the street. The police took it seriously, especially after they found more evidence in his room, including a box of electronics he'd stolen from previous roommates, each one carefully labeled with the date and the offense it had committed. They tracked Stephen down at his workplace that same day. Turns out the pharmaceutical lab had recently put him on administrative leave for erratic behavior. Co-workers had complained about him screaming at them for typing too loudly or walking too heavily in the hallways. When they arrested him, he was completely calm, even seemed relieved. During questioning, he told police he'd been planning this for weeks, ever since my alarm went off that first Monday. In his mind, I'd broken an unspoken contract, violated the sanctity of his quiet space. The detective who interviewed me later said Stephen showed no remorse, just kept insisting that people who made noise deserved whatever happened to them. They found more journals at his workplace, dating back years, documenting dozens of people he'd punished in various ways for noise violations. Most were minor: sugar in gas tanks, anonymous noise complaints to landlords, sabotaged electronics. But the patterns were escalating. What really haunts me is how normal he seemed during our coffee shop meeting. How he'd smiled and shaken my hand, already planning what he might do to me if I disturbed his peace. The forensic psychologist who evaluated him said Stephen had developed an extreme hypersensitivity to sound, possibly triggered by years of night shift work and sleep deprivation. Combined with what they described as antisocial personality disorder, it had created a perfect storm. He genuinely believed he was justified in his actions, saw himself as some kind of vigilante protecting the sanctity of silence. The trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. He got 15 years for attempted murder, plus additional time for the stalking and harassment. His lawyer tried to argue for an insanity defense, but the methodical nature of his planning, the detailed journals, the careful escalation, all showed he knew exactly what he was doing. But here's where it gets stranger. When the police arrived at Stephen's workplace, he was gone. His supervisor said he'd clocked in that morning but disappeared around 10 a.m., right around the time I was breaking out of the apartment. His workstation was cleared out, computer wiped, like he'd been planning this. They searched for weeks, but Stephen had vanished completely. No credit card usage, no phone pings, nothing. The detective theorized he'd been preparing for this possibility all along, probably had a go bag ready. What they found in his apartment during the investigation was even more unsettling. Fake IDs, hair dye, colored contacts. Stephen might not even have been his real name. The pharmaceutical company admitted they'd never done a thorough background check because he'd been so qualified, so perfect on paper. I stayed with friends for the rest of the semester, rotating between couches, too paranoid to sign another lease. Every quiet person made me nervous. Every unexpected note made my heart race. The University Housing Board removed the original ad, but sometimes I wonder how many other Stephen-like situations are out there, hiding behind normal-looking roommate postings. Then, about 3 months later, I got a package. No return address, but I knew. Inside was my old phone, the one that had mysteriously disappeared from my nightstand a week before the gas incident. It was wiped clean except for one video in the camera roll. The video showed me sleeping, filmed from inside my room, dated 2 weeks before everything went down. At the end of the video, just barely visible in the corner, was a figure standing perfectly still in my closet. The timestamp showed 3:47 a.m. I never reported it to the police. What was the point? He was already gone, and somehow I knew that video was his way of saying goodbye, of letting me know he could have done worse but chose not to. These days I live alone, triple-check my locks, and sleep with my closet doors removed completely. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:47 a.m. for no reason at all. Last winter was brutal in Boston, and I was desperate for a place to live after my previous roommate situation imploded. I'd been sleeping on couches for 8 weeks, showering at the gym, living out of 2 suitcases while frantically searching for anything affordable. When a listing popped up for a room in a 2-bedroom near Alston, I contacted the guy immediately. Nathan seemed perfectly normal during our video chat. Soft-spoken, worked in tech, kept to himself mostly. He even offered to lower the deposit since I was between paychecks. The apartment itself was nothing special, just your typical Boston rental with creaky floors and radiators that clanged all night. But after weeks of instability, it felt like a palace. I moved in on a Thursday afternoon, exhausted from my overnight shifts at Mass General, grateful to finally have my own space again. The first few weeks were uneventful, almost boring really. Nathan worked from his room most days, emerging only to make coffee or heat up takeout in the microwave. He had this particular way of walking, always on his tiptoes, barely making a sound, that I found oddly considerate given how thin the walls were. We'd exchange pleasantries in the kitchen, talk about the weather, or complain about the landlord who never fixed anything properly. He mentioned he did cybersecurity consulting, which explained all the computer equipment in his room. Through the gap under his door, I could always see the glow of multiple monitors, hear the constant hum of what he said were servers for his work. He even helped me set up my Wi-Fi when I moved in, insisting on configuring my laptop himself to make sure I had optimal security settings. I thought I'd hit the roommate jackpot. Quiet, helpful, paid rent on time, and kept the common areas clean. Everything changed about 3 weeks in when I noticed my laptop acting strange. The webcam light would flicker on for just a second when I opened it, then quickly turn off. At first I figured it was just a glitch. The laptop was already 4 years old and had survived college plus countless spilled coffees. But then it started happening more frequently, sometimes even when I was just typing up patient notes or browsing social media. I'd catch that tiny green light in my peripheral vision, blinking on and off like it was winking at me. When I mentioned it casually to Nathan one morning, he immediately offered to take a look. "Probably just a driver issue," he said, already reaching for my laptop with those long, pale fingers of his. Something about his eagerness made me hesitate, and I told him I'd handle it myself. His expression shifted for just a moment, this flash of irritation that disappeared so fast I wondered if I'd imagined it. Then came the login notifications. Random alerts on my phone about new sign-ins to my email from devices I didn't recognize, IP addresses from different states. My banking app locked me out after too many failed attempts that I never made. My Instagram started following random tech accounts that posted about surveillance equipment and hidden cameras. Each time I'd change my passwords, making them longer and more complex. But within days, the strange activity would start again. The worst part was how specific the intrusions felt. Whoever was doing this would log into my Spotify at 3 a.m. and play my recently listened playlist on repeat, or add items to my Amazon cart that I'd been browsing earlier. They'd mark emails as read that I knew I hadn't opened yet, little violations that made me question my own memory. I started paying closer attention to Nathan's behavior after that. He had this habit of appearing in the kitchen right when I'd get home from my shifts, no matter what time it was. 7 a.m., 3 a.m., midnight. Always with that same ceramic mug, always asking how my night went with this intense focus that made me uncomfortable. He knew things he shouldn't have known, like when I'd mention being tired and he'd say, "Yeah, you only got 4 hours of sleep yesterday," or asking about a specific patient I'd never told him about. Once he commented on a documentary I'd watched on my laptop with headphones on, while he was supposedly at a friend's place. When I confronted him about it, he just laughed and said the walls were thinner than I realized, that he must have heard it through the ventilation system. But I knew I'd been wearing noise-canceling headphones the entire time. The breaking point came on a Saturday when Nathan left for what he said was a weekend coding boot camp. Finally having the apartment to myself, I decided to deep clean everything, including checking behind furniture for dust bunnies and lost items. That's when I found it, a small USB drive wrapped in black electrical tape, stuck to the underside of my desk with mounting putty. My heart hammered as I peeled it off, the adhesive leaving residue on my fingers. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my old laptop, not my current one. and found folders with my name, containing screenshots of my emails, browsing history, even copies of my work schedules and patient notes. But that wasn't the worst discovery. In my bathroom, while cleaning the ceiling fixtures, I noticed the smoke detector looked different from the one in the hallway. The screws were newer, shinier, and when I stood on the toilet to get a closer look, I could see a tiny lens nestled between the ventilation slots. My whole body went numb staring at that camera. How long had it been there? How many showers had I taken? How many private moments had been recorded? I grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and carefully removed the detector, my disgust growing as I saw the sophisticated setup. A tiny wireless camera connected to a battery pack, all fitted perfectly inside the modified detector housing. The craftsmanship was meticulous, professional even. I took photos of everything with my phone, then searched the rest of the apartment with newfound paranoia. Behind the living room mirror, I found another device. Inside the air vent in my bedroom, a third camera angled directly at my bed. Each discovery made me feel more violated, more stupid for not noticing sooner. The worst part was realizing all those times Nathan had been helping me, setting up my Wi-Fi, offering to fix things in my room. He'd been installing his surveillance network. I packed everything I could fit into my car that afternoon, my mind racing through all the implications. Should I call the police immediately? Confront Nathan? I decided to wait at a coffee shop near the police station until I could calm down enough to think clearly. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Hey, conference got canceled, heading back early. Want me to pick up dinner?" My skin crawled reading his casual tone. 20 minutes later, another text. "Your car's not here." "Everything okay?" Then another. "I see you were in my room, we should talk." I hadn't been in his room, but somehow he knew I'd found his cameras. My phone started ringing, Nathan calling repeatedly, each ring making my anxiety spike higher. When I finally blocked his number, the email started. "I can explain everything. You're overreacting. I was just trying to keep you safe. I know where you are." I drove straight to the police station, my phone continuously buzzing with notifications I was too scared to check. The officer who took my report seemed skeptical at first. Apparently, roommate disputes were common and usually didn't amount to much. But when I showed him the photos of the cameras and the USB drive contents, his demeanor changed completely. He called in a detective who specialized in cyber crimes, a woman named Detective Huang who looked at the evidence with growing concern. "This is sophisticated stuff," she said, scrolling through the screenshots on my phone. "Your roommate said he works in cybersecurity?" When I nodded, she exchanged a look with the patrol officer. They sent a unit to the apartment immediately while I gave my statement. What they found there still makes me sick to think about. Nathan wasn't at the apartment when the police arrived, but his room revealed the full extent of his obsession. Multiple monitors showing feeds from cameras they found throughout the apartment. Not just the ones I'd discovered, but dozens more hidden in places I'd never thought to check. Inside light fixtures, behind electrical outlets, even sewn into the living room curtains. One monitor displayed my current location at the police station, tracking my phone in real time despite me changing all my passwords. They found external hard drives labeled with dates going back to before I'd even moved in, containing footage of the previous tenant, a woman who'd mysteriously broken her lease early. There were notebooks filled with handwritten logs of my daily routines, analyzed and categorized like I was some kind of research project. Pages describing my sleep patterns, bathroom habits, the way I looked when I cried after bad shifts at the hospital. He documented everything with scientific precision. The police searched for Nathan for 3 days, but he'd vanished completely. His equipment was too advanced to trace, his digital footprint somehow scrubbed clean despite all the evidence in his room. Detective Huang seemed frustrated but not entirely surprised. "Guys with these skills know how to disappear," she told me. They found that Nathan Brookfield wasn't even his real name. The ID he'd used for the lease was an expertly crafted fake. His background check had been hacked and modified. Even his fingerprints led nowhere. A week later, the cameras in the apartment started turning back on one by one. their little red lights glowing in the darkness despite being disconnected from any power source. The landlord refused to believe me, said I was paranoid, threatened to keep my deposit if I broke the lease. So I left anyway, stayed in a motel outside the city while looking for a new place. That was 8 months ago. I've moved 3 times since then, each time to a different state, but the strange incidents follow me everywhere. My devices still glitch in that familiar way. My accounts still get those unauthorized login attempts. Sometimes I'll walk into my apartment and things will be slightly different. A book moved, a window cracked open that I know I locked. The police in each new city listen politely, but say there's nothing they can do without proof. I've stopped trying to explain. I've learned to live with it now, this constant presence in my life. I leave notes for him sometimes next to my laptop. I know you're watching. Once, I came home to find a response typed on my screen. I know you know. We exist in this strange symbiosis now. Him watching, me performing normalcy. I don't know his real name or face anymore, but he knows everything about me. Some nights I wonder if he's even real, or if I've invented this digital ghost to explain the unexplainable violations I experienced. But then my webcam light flickers, just for a second, and I know he's still there. Back when I lived at the Lark Ridge Youth Center, I wasn't exactly the easiest kid to deal with. I'd gotten into fights, skipped school, got caught stealing dumb stuff from a gas station, all that led the court to place me there instead of juvie. It wasn't a terrible place, not like the horror stories you hear, but it was cold in a way you can't really measure with a thermostat. The kind of cold that settles into your bones, even in the summer. My days were mostly routine. Group therapy, chores, homework sessions, then lights out at 10. The staff weren't cruel, but they weren't warm either. Just tired, like they'd seen too much to care anymore. And the other kids, you learn quickly not to ask too many questions about why they're there. I got moved into a new room 3 weeks after I arrived. My old roommate got transferred out and they stuck me with this quiet kid named Eli. He was thin, like way too thin, and always wore his sleeves pulled halfway over his hands even when it was hot out. His dark hair hung low over his face, and he had this way of never really looking directly at anyone. Like his eyes would almost meet yours, then slide past like you weren't quite in focus. He didn't talk during group, didn't eat much, and never laughed, not even when some of the others cracked jokes during chores. The staff said he'd been there a few months already, came from a situation best left alone. That's literally what one of the counselors said, best left alone. The first night we shared that room, I didn't sleep much. It wasn't because of the creaky bed or the humming air vent. I'd already gotten used to that. It was because around midnight, I heard him whispering. Not like muttering to himself or talking in his sleep. It was whispering in full sentences, like he was answering someone. Pausing, then responding again. His voice stayed low, just under the threshold of clarity, but the rhythm felt conversational. I turned in my bed trying to listen, but all I could make out was a word that sounded like downstairs. The next morning, he acted totally normal, or as normal as he ever did. Didn't say a word about it. I told myself he was probably dreaming, or maybe just processing stuff the only way he could. But it kept happening, every single night. Sometimes I'd wake up around 2 or 3 and hear him whispering again. Always those same careful pauses. A few times I even thought I heard another voice answering, something too soft to be real, but definitely not Eli's. One night I asked him about it the next morning, just casually like, "You were talking in your sleep last night." He didn't even blink, just shrugged and said, "I don't remember dreaming." Then he walked out of the room before I could say anything else. A few days later, I noticed something strange with the door to our room. It didn't latch right anymore. Every night before bed, I'd push it closed, and every morning it was cracked open just an inch or two. I wasn't imagining it. I started stacking one of my textbooks against the bottom to mark it, and sure enough, every morning it had been pushed aside. I asked Eli about it directly once, and he just blinked at me like I was talking nonsense. "Maybe staff checks in," he mumbled. But I knew they didn't, at least not during the window from midnight to 5. They had cameras in the hallway, and I'd have been written up if someone saw me up that late. No one said a word. That weekend, I skipped the group movie night to stay in the room and wait. Eli had gone down for dinner early, so I stayed behind pretending to be asleep when he came back. He thought I was out cold. Around 11:45, he sat up in bed. No sound, no movement, just suddenly upright like a puppet being pulled. Then he got out of bed barefoot and walked to the door. He didn't even check if I was watching, just turned the knob and stepped out into the hall without bothering to close it behind him. I stayed frozen in bed, listening. Nothing. Just that quiet buzz from the light over the bathroom sink down the hall. After maybe 5 minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and followed. The hallway lights were dimmed for night mode and the silence was heavy, like the whole building was holding its breath. I crept past the bathrooms, past the game room, and toward the stairwell. The center only had 2 floors and our room was up top. I peeked over the railing and that's when I saw him. Eli was standing at the bottom of the stairs, completely still, facing the basement door. Now here's the thing, we weren't allowed in the basement. Staff said it was just old records and equipment and the door was always locked. But he was just standing there, not moving, like he was waiting. Then the door opened. I swear to you, it opened on its own. Just a slow, steady creak inward. No one on the other side. Eli didn't flinch. He stepped forward and slipped inside like he'd done it 100 times. The door started to close behind him, and I felt this surge of panic. I didn't know why, but I knew I couldn't let it shut. I raced down the stairs and caught it just in time, holding it with my foot. The air that came out of that room wasn't cold exactly. It felt stale, like it hadn't moved in years. There was a faint smell too, like rusted metal and mold. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The basement wasn't what I expected. There were no shelves of paperwork or broken furniture, just an empty, narrow corridor lit by a single flickering bulb at the far end. The walls were concrete, but not like the rest of the building. These were darker, like they'd been painted over dozens of times. I followed the sound of footsteps, keeping close to the wall. At the end of the hallway, there was a door slightly ajar, and beyond it I could hear Eli whispering again. But this time there was no pause between his sentences. It was a stream of low, rushed words, almost like chanting. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but something about the tone made my teeth clench. I pushed the door open a bit more. Inside was a small, windowless room with nothing but a desk and a rusted metal cabinet in the corner. Eli was standing with his back to me, both hands pressed flat against the wall like he was bracing himself. There was no one else in there. No furniture, no staff, just him. And yet, he kept speaking, like he was trying to convince someone of something. I remember backing up slowly, unsure whether to confront him or leave before he noticed me. And then I heard it. A voice. Not his. It came from the other side of the room, low and croaky, like wood splintering under pressure. One word. Stay. I ran. I didn't even look back. I sprinted up the stairs, slammed the door shut behind me, and bolted to the night guard's office. I told him Eli was in the basement, that I'd seen the door open on its own, that I heard someone else down there. He didn't believe a word, obviously, said I was dreaming or messing with him, but he agreed to check it out to teach me a lesson. I sat in the hallway while he went down. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When he came back up, he looked different. He didn't yell, didn't scold me, just quietly said, "There's no one down there," and walked back to his office without another word. I didn't sleep that night. Eli was gone by morning. Staff claimed his mother had picked him up, that his case had been resolved, but no one ever came to get him. I knew because I sat by the front window all morning pretending to read. There was no car, no visitor, just a van that showed up hours later with a new kid like Eli had never existed. I asked about him. The others shrugged it off. Even the counselors avoided the topic. I checked the file cabinet in the common room where they kept intake papers. His folder was gone, like he'd been erased. I still think about that voice. Not Eli's, but the one that answered him. It didn't sound human. It sounded ancient and wrong, like it had been trapped down there for too long. I never went near that basement again. A month later, I was transferred to a smaller center upstate, and I never heard from anyone at Larkridge again. But sometimes, late at night, I remember how that door opened on its own. And I wonder if Eli was ever really talking to himself.